Blackshirts and Reds by Michael Parenti. Section: What measure of pain? Is the pain of revolution worth the gain? Cost-benefit accounting is a complicated business when applied to social transitions. But have we ever bothered to compare the violence of revolution against the violence that preceded it? Quote, "I do not know how one measures the price of historical victories," said Robert Heilbronner. "I only know that the way in which we ordinarily keep the books of history is wrong." End quote. We make no tally of the generations claimed by that combination of economic exploitation and political suppression so characteristic of the ancien regimes. The hapless victims of flood and famine in the Yangtze Valley of yesterday. The child prostitutes found dead in the back alleys of old Shanghai. The musecs stricken by cold and starvation across the frozen steppes of Russia. And what of today? No one is tallying the thousands of nameless victims who succumbed to U.S.-trained torturers in Latin America. The hundreds of villages burned by counterinsurgency forces. The millions who are driven from their ancestral lands and sentenced to permanently stunted and malnourished lives. The millions more who perish in the desperate misery and congestion of shanty slums and internment camps. Their sufferings go unrecorded and are not figured in the balance when the revolution metes out justice to erstwhile oligarchs and oppressors, or commits excesses and abuses of its own. And how do we measure the pain of the tens of millions of children throughout the world, many as young as 6 and 7, who are forced to work 70 hours a week, confined in ill-lit, poorly ventilated workshops, under conditions reminiscent of the most horrific days of the Industrial Revolution? The General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, GATT, a sweeping multinational free trade act that amounts to a carte blanche for global capitalism, offers no protection for children who are exploited, abused, overworked, and underpaid. During GATT negotiations, leaders of third world countries successfully argued against placing any restrictions on child labor, arguing that children have always worked in their cultures, and such traditional practices should be respected. To prohibit child labor would limit the free market and affect severe hardship on those poor families in which a child is often the only wage earner. Even if the long-standing practice of children helping out on farms is acceptable, assuming they are not overworked and are allowed to go to school, the practice of, quote, locking them into a hot box of a factory for 14 hours a day is something else. Furthermore, they may be the only wage earner, quote, because adult workers have been laid off in favor of children, who are infinitely more exploitable and provide bigger profits for prosperous factory owners, end quote. Traveling across Cuba in 1959, immediately after the overthrow of the U.S.-supported right-wing Batista dictatorship, Mike Faulkner witnessed, quote, a spectacle of almost unrelieved poverty. The rural population lived in makeshift shacks without minimal sanitation. Malnourished children went barefoot in the dirt and suffered, quote, the familiar plague of parasites common to the third world. There were almost no doctors or schools. And through much of the year, families that depended solely on the seasonal sugar harvest lived close to starvation. How does that victimization in pre-revolutionary Cuba measure against the much more widely publicized repression that came after the revolution, when Castro's communists executed a few hundred of the previous regime's police assassins and torturers, drove assorted upper-class moneybags into exile, and intimidated various other opponents of radical reforms into silence. Today, Cuba is a different place. For all its mistakes and abuses, the Cuban Revolution brought sanitation, schools, health clinics, jobs, housing, and human services to a level not found throughout most of the Third World, and in many parts of the First World. Infant mortality in Cuba has dropped from 60 per 1,000 in 1960 to 9.7 per 1,000 in 1991, while life expectancy rose from 55 to 75 in that same period. Smallpox, malaria, tuberculosis, typhoid, polio, and numerous other diseases have been wiped out by improved living standards and public health programs. Cuba has enjoyed a level of literacy higher than the United States, and a life expectancy that compares well with advanced industrial nations. Other peoples besides the Cubans have benefited. As Fidel Castro tells it, beginning of long quote, "The Cuban Revolution has sent teachers, doctors, and workers to dozens of third world countries without charging a penny. It shed its own blood fighting colonialism, fighting apartheid, and fascism. At one point, we had 25,000 third world students studying on scholarship. We still have many scholarship students from Africa and other countries. In addition, our country has treated more children, 13,000, who were the victims of Chernobyl tragedy than all other countries put together. They don't talk about that, and that's why they blockade us. The country with the most teachers per capita of all countries in the world, including developed countries. The country with the most doctors per capita of all countries, one for every 214 inhabitants. The country with the most art instructors per capita of all countries in the world. The country with the most sports instructors in the world. That gives you an idea of the effort involved. A country where life expectancy is more than 75 years. Why are they blockading Cuba? Because no other country has done more for its people. It's the hatred of the ideas that Cuba represents." End of quote. Cuba's sin, in the eyes of global capitalists, is not its, quote, lack of democracy. Most third world capitalist regimes are far more repressive. Cuba's real sin is that it has tried to develop an alternate to the global capitalist system, an egalitarian socio-economic order that placed corporate property under public ownership, abolished capitalist investors as a class entity, and put people before profits and national independence before IMF servitude. So, a conservative think tank like the Heritage Foundation rated Cuba, along with Laos, Iraq, and North Korea, as countries with the lowest level of, quote, economic freedom. Countries with a high level of economic freedom were those that imposed little or no taxes or regulations on business, and did without wage protections, price controls, environmental safeguards, and benefits for the poor. Economic freedom is the real concern of conservatives and plutocrats. The freedom to utilize vast sums of money to accumulate still vaster sums, regardless of the human and environmental costs. Mass productivity, coupled with elitist distribution, results in more wealth for the few and greater poverty for the many. So, after 2 centuries of incredible technological development and unprecedented economic expansion, the number of people living in poverty in the capitalist world has grown more quickly than any other demographic cohort. The world's slum population has increased at a far greater rate than the total global population. Amazing growth in industrial productivity has been accompanied by increasingly desperate want, misery, and repression. In short, there is a causal link between vast concentrations of wealth and widespread poverty. The next time someone preaches the free market gospel of economic freedom and productivity, we need ask, for whose benefit and at whose cost? Those who show concern for the elites overthrown in the whirl of revolution should also keep in mind the hundreds of millions more who are obliterated by economic reactionism. If all rebellions were to be successfully repressed today and forever, free market autocracy's violence against humanity would be with us more unrestrained than ever, as is indeed happening. For these reasons, those of us who are genuinely concerned about democracy, social justice, and the survival of our planet should support rather than oppose popular revolutions. End of section.